Welcome to Reconnect, the podcast dedicated to sharing and defending the good news of Jesus Christ. That is, Jesus died for sins, was buried, and on the third day was raised again according to the Scriptures for our salvation. It is through Jesus alone that we are reconnected into a right relationship with God. Reconnect us, O Lord. All right, listeners, thanks for tuning in again to another episode of Reconnect. If this is your first episode, welcome to Reconnect. As the intro to this podcast says, this podcast is dedicated to sharing and defending the good news of Jesus Christ. And sitting right now on episode number 18, most of the episodes have focused more on the defending part, or how we may encounter objections as we share the gospel, or objections we may hear that we can then use to share the gospel. This one is going to focus mainly on the sharing the gospel element. Periodically, I want to have episodes where I talk to guests, which I think are sharing the gospel in very unique ways, if not unique ways, just ways that I think could, if you hear about what they're doing, encourage you or spur you on to do something similar. So just a good way to encourage each other, know what other believers are doing in America and around the world to share the gospel. And so for this episode, I have Chris Thompson with me. Chris, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Andy. Thanks for having me on today.
How did we meet, Chris? Do you remember how we got connected at all?
You know what? I think it had to do with... well, it was definitely through Contradict.
Okay.
It was through the Contradict Facebook page. And you know what it was? It was my daughter who goes to Riverside Community College in Riverside, California, and she had seen a Contradict sticker on a car. And she had come home and she had told me about it. And so I looked up Contradict Movement and found the Facebook page. And of course, joined you and followed you there. And then, really, I think I like direct message you through Facebook, just kind of saying hi and wanted to kind of connect a little bit more, because I think kind of the content that you're doing on the website and some of the things that you do through college evangelism really kind of struck me as, you know what, we've got something in common here. So there was kind of a push for me to reach out, and I'm certainly glad that I did, made a great friend, and certainly somebody in yourself who has a great deal of knowledge in apologetics, is that being a topic that I find so fascinating, and I really love it. So it was great being able to meet you on Facebook and kind of keep up with what you've done with the movement since then. So. Yeah,
it's so interesting too. You said it was through Facebook. I honestly couldn't remember how we got connected. I know I think you contacted me about your newspaper, which is what I'm wanting to talk to you about for this episode, to encourage people with, because you were asking me something about this Christian newspaper you were going to be starting, and I just thought it was a great idea. This idea of just using printed words. It's how God has delivered his message to us throughout the ages, the written word and then the spoken word, and you're sharing the gospel through a Christian newspaper. And I just find that awesome, and I want to hopefully just pick your brain a little bit on what prompted you to start a Christian newspaper.
Sure.
Where do you live, by the way, just so people have an idea of where your paper is out and about?
Okay. So I live in Riverside, California, which is what we would refer to in Southern California as the Inland Empire, as I know you've got listeners kind of all over the area.
Mm-hmm.
It's I would say east of the main kind of Los Angeles metro area, before you get to the Mojave Desert.
Okay.
So, so in this Inland Empire area, it's interesting. Here's an interesting stat for you. 78% of the Inland Empire considers themselves Christians. So over 3.4 million people in this area. And we do have some Christian radio. And But at the time, we didn't have anything that was Christian in print, and I'll tell you a couple of stories as we go along as to kind of why it came around. But there just seemed to be a need. If you think about that, and that's just the Inland Empire area. We're not talking about Los Angeles Metro or San Diego.
Yeah.
But 3.4 million people claiming to be Christians in this area, and it just seems to be really underserved by Christian media. And I think there's pretty much any market in America you could say that it's underserved by Christian media. Because, I mean, let's face it. Christianity, evangelism comes at a cost, a financial cost. I mean, there are finances that go into evangelism, and sometimes it's kind of hard to come by those types of funds. So that's where I'm at. That's where the publication is. It's in the Inland Empire of Southern California. Although we mail it everywhere. It's not a very expensive subscription. I've got some people that subscribe probably as far away as Oregon, and then of course we put it online, and so there's viewers and readers in numerous different areas. But that's where I'm at and where the publication is. Yeah,
and we haven't shared the name of the paper. I was going to maybe just let that draw out as we talked, but I think I just want to go and share that since you mentioned that it is online. It's Life in His Hands, right? Is that the correct name? Is it Life in His Hands Christian Ministries Newspaper? Is that the full name?
Yeah, it's called Life in His Hands Christian Newspaper, and you can find it online at lifeinhishands.org, all one word. And I'll be honest with you. I guess a little background on myself first. I'll graduate from seminary with my MDiv, my Master's of Divinity, in September, and so through theology being my major, but I would say my minor in counseling, and I really, from a counseling standpoint, really kind of looked at from counseling being a ministry, what is the main point of Christian counseling? And it really is to get us back into His hands, to get our life back into His hands, because that's really where our answers are. And that name just really flowed really well, it seemed to me, into the name of a actual publication. And not to take anything away from any other Christian newspapers, but you'll see a lot of nationwide. No Christian newspaper is very large, but you'll see, maybe it's the Christian Times or the Northeastern Christian Report. I just thought a title that really kind of says what the content is all about.
Right.
So it's called Life in His Hands Christian Newspaper, and it's at lifeinhishands.org.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I like how you said it's even online. So listeners, if you're thinking about publication, but as Chris said, there are a good bit of cost to evangelism. Printing is not cheap, so an online option could be a good way to start if this is something you're wanting to consider doing. So, Chris, what led you to actually start a newspaper? Was it just seeing the need? But what sort of culminated in you actually doing this?
Well, it was numerous different things, to tell you the truth. I'm going to start back in July of 2013. I fell unemployed, and I had really never been unemployed in probably 15 years. My background is in media, marketing, advertising, and I've spent time in numerous different mediums, from radio and television, and selling phone books and telemarketing and directing creative departments in magazine and print and this stuff. So, I have this background professionally, and so when I fell unemployed in July of 2013, I really started to, I thought finding work was going to be really easy. And so I threw out some resumes, and surprisingly, the phone wasn't ringing. And I kept throwing them out, and the phone didn't ring. I'm thinking that between July of 2013 and the end of the year, so the next 6 months, I probably put over 1,000 resumes in the market. No joke. probably 1,000 resumes, and it came around the new year. And I probably should have hit my knees a lot earlier, but it was around that time that it was actually February of 2014. There was a couple of things that happened. One, I'd just been hitting my knees for a couple of months, saying, "Okay, I should have given this job search to you earlier, but what do I do? What do you want me to do?" And the answer really came back in. He said, God really said, "Do what I've taught you how to do, but now I want you to do it for me." And that culminated at about the same time. I'll tell you this story as well. It was about the same time that I had jury viewed. And it was February of 2014. And so I had to go down to the courthouse for about 2 weeks straight. And there was a gentleman outside the courthouse every single morning, and he was passing out copies of Watchtower. You're familiar with Watchtower, yes?
Yes, Jehovah's Witness publication.
Correct.
Publishing branch.
And so, I thought about it, and, here are all these people that are going into the courthouse who are, I would say that maybe 30% actually picked up the publication. There's a lot of people that turned it down. But here's a lot of people that are being handed, let's call a spade. They're being handed a publication full of lies.
Absolutely.
And a publication that is going to lead them down a wrong road. There's no argument about it. It's black and white.
Right.
And so, so this is about the same time that, God's kind of put on my heart to take what I do professionally and do something with it. But I thought, if I were to go and stand out there, what do I have to hand out? What does anyone have to hand out? And there's a couple of national publications, Daily Bread and maybe Guideposts, but we don't really have anything. There's nothing. There's nothing that I could go down and hand out. And it was a culmination of both of those things that said, if there's nothing to hand out, then why don't you create one? And that's really where the publication started.
Yeah, that's great. Excellent story. So you got the idea based on the counseling, getting into Christ's hands. I like that name too because it definitely says something besides just Christian, just a label. Because so many things can be labeled Christian, which really aren't. You already mentioned the Jehovah's Witnesses with the Watchtower publication. I believe they would label themselves Christian. So just even Christian doesn't mean as much. So I definitely like what you're saying. Get into Christ's hands, and you have a great logo too of a boat on waters with the sail mast being across. So just excellent. That already portrays like, hey, if you are in the boat, you are in his hands. So just the good news is already sort of being shown just by the name and the image that you have beside it, the name. So what was the first step you did then? So if someone's listening and they're going, there isn't a Christian newspaper where I live, or maybe this could be something my congregation could do, or something I could do as a hobby. I'm even thinking some high school students may have enough time to, hey, can I put together a newspaper that I can hand out around my school? Something along those lines. What would be the first steps that they should take, maybe based on what you did?
Well, let me answer that in two ways. I'm going to tell you first what I did, and then second, I'm going to tell you what I did wrong.
Okay.
And I think that one of the first things that I did in editorial, we call it an editorial budget. A budget meaning, you're keeping a list. You're kind of creating a list of stories that you want to go in your paper and different types of stories. And so I started creating that. And then I did have a graphic artist friend of mine. Now I can design, but I wanted to put it in somebody else's hands. And I did have a friend of mine. I told him, I said, here's a newspaper. I'm only going to give you the title, but I need a logo. It's called Life in His Hands, and I'm not going to tell you anything else. Create me a logo of whatever God puts on your heart. And he created the boat. And when he showed it to me, I'm like, okay, that has nothing to do with anything. Really? I said, I don't get it. And he says, what came to my mind was Peter and, being out on the water. and he kind of explained it, and he says, if you're in the water and you're sinking, even an empty boat will save you. There could be nobody in the boat, and that boat can save you, but you need a boat. One thing that I've never done in any of I've never turned down anything that God's handed us, whether it be help, people, logos. And so I said, you know what? That's what God put on your heart. And so here we go. So that's probably what I worked on first of all, was I started working on the creative aspect of the newspaper first of all. I already had a template built, and I have the experience in designing. So I went to work in actually designing the paper, and then finding a printer that would print it. And, of course, you have to come up with funding. I funded the first few issues on my own, which, mind you, I'm still unemployed at the time. And let me put a little asterisk on this right now. So the publication's been going since April of 2014, and I don't make money on it. It's honestly, it's financially negative. We do have some sponsors, but so I don't make a living on it. I currently now have a full-time job, which is great. But to come back to it, what I would have done differently, and the one thing that I would tell somebody if they were looking to go down this path, which I would certainly encourage, and I would assist anyone that wanted to. There's a few things that you need to do first that I didn't do first. Number one, secure funding. It's not cheap. You're probably not going to be able to cover all of your costs for the first, I don't know. They say traditionally in newspaper about 2 years.
Wow.
We have about our fourth or fifth issue, we were covering our costs, but that hasn't been common. Number two, and probably the most important part, and I should have done this first, but you have to set your distribution. You really need to get your distribution set before you print. I was so excited to print. What happened was my first edition comes out, and I have thousands of papers in my garage, and now I just get in my car and I go driving around and dropping them off without really setting that distribution in stone. I'll just give you an example. There's many people, I've been asked numerous times, will you bring the publication to Orange County? And I would have absolutely no problem bringing it to Orange County. Knowing what I know now, is having the distribution network in place has to come first.
Right.
And so I would advise that to anyone else. There's a lot of success if or let me rephrase that. A lot of people, and what I did, I wanted to get to the part where you have this printed product and you're so excited and it gets to your house and you can celebrate. But then the work started, and I didn't have the things planned out that I should have had in the first place. So what would I do first? What would I advise? Talk to people who would possibly sponsor or donate.
Okay.
Number one. And number two, find places that would be willing to distribute. If you're something like what I'm doing, you're looking for churches, nonprofits, libraries, businesses that are owned by Christians, maybe people who go to your church. You might be looking for, maybe it could be a simple gas station that gives you the okay to drop it off. But find that distribution network first.
Yeah.
Before you put the money into printing. Right.
And just even thinking back to what you initially said about one of the markers that led you to start this paper, you saw a Jehovah's Witness just handing out, I'm assuming their Awake magazine, which is their monthly magazine, Awake. I forget the name of their other one. There's Awake and one other that they have, which are monthly.
I believe it is Awake and Watchtower.
Okay, just Watchtower then. So Awake and Watchtower handing out. Maybe if someone's thinking maybe smaller scale than you, I can print, 300-400 little flyers, maybe not even in whole paper, but something that can be folded in half, have a couple articles in it, and just during the month I have to hand out some of these somewhere, kind of maybe go to the courthouse. People are always going to be flooding in. I had to serve jury duty once too, and I'm just thinking of it. When we had to get there at the morning when the courthouse was open, there was just a huge line of traffic just flowing into this courtroom, which I was pretty shocked by. So maybe that's just some things. Before we get into the don'ts, I just have a few questions on what you just shared.
Sure.
How many copies do you print? Maybe first issues versus what you're doing now, and how much are you paying for that? Just so some people have an idea, like how many pages are in each issue, and is it full color, etc.
Sure. So right now I print an 8-page, what we call a tabloid. Now it's not a tabloid like the tabloids, but it's in the newspaper world it's the name of a particular fold of the paper. So it's basically one that you will open. You'll open it kind of horizontally, and it's small. It's smaller, but it's about 11 by 17 is what you're looking at, and it's 8 pages. I print the paper in all full color, and I don't. Traditionally, in newspapers will charge advertisers for their ads being in full color. So typically, you've got a lower rate if you're black and white. One thing that I do with my sponsors is I don't charge anyone more for full color because of the fact I've already asked my printer to print every page in full color. I'm paying for it anyways, so I'm not going to pass that cost on to a sponsor because I've been in a newspaper for a long time, and I know that they're going to get money where they can. That's just not the way that I want to do business or ministry. Mm-hmm. So you would ask about the cost, and so here's where it's hard to give solid figures. First of all, I print 8 pages in a tabloid format, so anyone researching, you can kind of see what I'm doing now. 8 pages is the smallest that I can go, and I've been 8 pages since we began. I would love to grow to 12, and then you'd grow to 16, and you're growing in increments of 4 and of 8 pages. I'd love to grow. It's a financial, effort to be able to grow in page count. I'll give you a ballpark figure on printing, and I'm going to use, just so anyone can benchmark this, I'm going to use a figure of 10,000 copies.
Okay.
Your 10,000 copies is going to cost you anywhere between, I know this is wide range, but anywhere between $400 and $1,000. Okay. And let me tell you why it's such a wide range, is because there's a lot of different variables that go into printing. And I don't want to bore people with the deep newspaper issues, but there are different grades of newspaper. I actually use one that's called a high bright, so it's a more white newsprint than typically what your daily newspaper is on.
Okay.
And it's also a little bit thicker. It's a 35 pound, so that's something we're all familiar with, is paper poundage, right? You go and you buy printer paper, it comes, in a certain pound. So, but your traditional newspaper is a 27.7 pound. And so that's a little bit cheaper. I pay a little bit more for Life in His Hands because, I wanted a little bit more quality. You can also use a heavier paper than that. On the other side, there are differences in printers. There are, especially in the Los Angeles area, there are some printers who may print out of kind of a back alley warehouse. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with them, but they've got a very, very old press.
Right.
That's the kind of press I have to use for financial reasons. There are some printers who use very high quality, newer press equipment. That's the kind of printer I would like to use someday. But that to go to that printer would probably cost me an extra $400 per issue to do the same exact thing.
Right.
But it is better quality.
Gotcha.
And like I said, it all comes down to financials.
Right. And you mentioned distribution being something you would want to set up first. Something I was actually curious about with this was How are those papers delivered from the printer to you? Are you having to pick up and transport 10,000 copies, or do they deliver them to your home address for you? And do they? I mean, that's a lot. Is that dropped in a pallet in your driveway? How does that work?
Surprisingly, and excuse me, using 10,000 as a benchmark, my monthly has ranged anywhere between 10,000 is where we started. We've been up to 20 and 25,000. Mm-hmm. I will print more if we know that there's a big event coming up that we're going to be at, and we're going to pass out a lot of papers, so I'll print more for that. 10,000 papers at my size it'll easily fit in my trunk and in the back seats of my car. So I drive from Riverside about an hour to Monterey Park to pick it up, and I'll bring it here. And it saves me a little bit on delivery. They would charge me about $150 to deliver it to me. And so, as you know, when it comes to ministry, sometimes those of us who are kind of in the position, kind of the doers, we have to pay with our time to save our money, if that makes any sense.
No, definitely. All right, and then this will just be my last question then before we take a break and get into what you were talking about, what you would not do. And definitely next segment, I want to cover more about what's in the paper, like what sort of things you put in there so people can have some ideas being generated for what they could publish or use.
Sure.
So the distribution, you said try to find churches, gas stations, stuff like that. One thing I was curious about was every time I go to a grocery store or a coffee shop, any shopping center, there is usually a stack or there's like a bin or a rack that has a ton of free magazines or catalogs or local publications like yours. It's like here in Orange County, it's OC Weekly. It's a really thick stapled book type thing, like 100 pages or more. That's always around for free. There's always apartment ad stuff. There's a Orange County Family magazine. I'm sure listeners see this too. Is that something that's a possibility? Do you know how you would get a newspaper into those? Because I feel like that's something that could be good, because I think that's someone distributing that for you, right?
Yes, and actually we've so absolutely I do. I have some great experience in that. Typically, these are organizations who, and you mentioned the apartment magazines. That's where it really all started, is in these apartment magazines. And what they did, they made deals with a lot of the supermarkets that said, you know what, let us put up a rack, and we will manage the free community publications for you. Because a lot of supermarkets had like various racks, and a lot of publications want to put something at a supermarket. So the apartment magazines really created an avenue for the grocery stores to where they don't have to deal with numerous different vendors. They can only deal with one. Now, somebody in my position, I can go to that company that operates that rack, and I can pay to be in that rack, which is something that I have done here in the Inland Empire. I have done it. I actually discontinued recently, and again, financially. Those are going to run between $50 per location, depending on the location. Now, I would suppose that yours in Orange County are a little bit more expensive than mine in the Inland Empire, which is typically the case of most in most things. So can you get in those? Yes, you can get in them. There is going to be a cost to them. And I will tell you this. Here's the one thing that I did find. Having a controlled distribution certainly gives you a little bit of advantage. And here's why. I have found in some of the supermarkets that I have done, there have been people in those I would associate as maybe non-believers who would take the bulk of everything that I had paid to put there, and they will just pick it up and put it in the trash. Yeah. And so, I mean, I still like it being there, but, those are ministry dollars. And it's kind of tough to see ministry dollars that have either been collected through sponsorships or donations to be turned around and put in the trash.
Yeah, definitely. All right, thanks for sharing that tip. I get what you're saying. Try to find a controlled distributor, someone that you know the stuff will be handed to individuals. Really good stuff, Chris. Thanks for sharing, and we'll come back after the segment. Listener, please check out lifeinhishands.org and just see what Chris is putting out each month. It's really great stuff, and you'll see on the site he lists a lot more than just the newspaper. There are lists to events, contests, a blog post. He's even had a podcast. So there's a lot there that you can get some ideas for what you can do.
Come check out blueeyedshyguy.blogspot.com, where I write about faith, family, and philosophy. Topics range from comparative religion, the nature of God through science and reasoning, and even open discussions on difficult social topics such as same-sex marriage and abortion. Each post is written with love and a desire to relate biblical principles with clarity. That's blueeyedshyguy.blogspot.com. Or you can visit facebook.com/blueeyedshyguy, where I post encouraging thoughts, scriptures, and original memes. And if you can't remember any of that, no worries. You can just Google Blue-Eyed Shy Guy and click whatever comes up. You might even find my YouTube channel where I make videos with my family. Any way you want to find me, you'll be glad you did.
To financially support Reconnect, visit contradictmovement.org and order your copy of Contradict, They Can't All Be True. Contradict stickers and tracts are also available. Again, that's contradictmovement.org.
Welcome back, listener. Chris Thompson still on the phone with me, my cell phone that is, and we are talking about his Christian newspaper, Life in His Hands Christian newspaper, which is published and distributed in the Inland Empire of Southern California. He's been going at this since 2014, and all the issues can be found online at lifeinhishands.org. That's all one word, no spaces, no dots, no hyphens, lifeinhishands.org. So I encourage you, please take the time to look through this, and the goal here is to hopefully some listeners may go, hey, this is something we can do. Maybe not to the extent of 8-page tabloid fold, full color, 10,000 copy distribution as we were talking about, but maybe you can print something small. Start with a little flyer, and we'll just hopefully see where God can lead you with this as we continue to talk with Chris. So, Chris, you said you wanted to share two things that you did at the start, which you would encourage people not to do. Could you go ahead and share those as well, please, just so listeners have a good idea?
And I think I may have gone into that a little bit in the last segment.
Yeah, on distribution.
But, yeah, the things that I would say, if there's something I would say not to do, is definitely something that I did. I was so excited about getting the final product that I skipped steps 2 through 9, and I went step 1 to 10. And I had a great product. Like I said, I had a great product in my garage, but I was missing something. And what I was missing were, some really important steps that I needed to take, such as filling out distribution and making sure I knew where I was going.
Yeah, definitely. Let's go ahead and talk about that product. It's funny to call something sharing the gospel a product, but What is in your paper? Run through us. Tell us what an issue typically looks like. From what I've seen, they're all basically the same. What sort of key components do you try to have in every issue? And I'm assuming you pick these based on your audience that you plan on targeting. So can you talk some about your target audience as well?
Sure. So the target audience is definitely this 3.4 million Christians in the Inland Empire. Now, I will say, I don't reach 3.4 million people in the Inland Empire. I would love to say that we did, but the goal is to reach them, and also I would say those on the outskirts of that number who are, maybe they're not a believer, but maybe they're curious.
Yeah.
And the one thing that I've always tried to do in all of our stories, all of our editorial, our writings, is I've tried to really make sure that the language that we use in the paper is something that maybe a non-believer could understand, or maybe somebody who's only been attending church for about a year or so. I don't want to talk over anyone's heads. That's why, recently we had a story about the importance of Pentecost and really, what is Pentecost? Why is it such a big deal? So along with that story, I ran, part of the book of Acts that really talks about it, chapter 2, that really talks about it, so I can explain, okay, this piece of editorial is talking about a theological subject, but let me bring you in, somebody that might be somewhat biblically illiterate, that hasn't really read the story. Let me share with you not only this theological point that we're trying to make, but I want to teach you about the topic as well. So I don't want to talk over people's heads, because I think that's where some people, they get a little bit afraid. Let's face it, some people are afraid to even pick up their Bible.
Right.
Because they're afraid of not being able to understand the language that it uses. And so I wanted to break down that barrier right off the bat and make sure that that anyone who reads the pages of Life in His Hands Christian newspaper can understand all of the content.
Yeah.
So not just the Christian, but yeah, the non-believer as well. I mean, there are people, let's face it, there are non-believers that you're not going to convert with a newspaper. But here's the one thing that stands out, and I get phone calls all the time, I get emails all the time. You put a newspaper out there in the community, I'm just a guy. I'm just a guy that sits behind my computer, sometimes in my garage or my kitchen table, or while my kids are, coloring, and I'm designing a paper. But somebody 3 towns over that I would have never met is going to find it somewhere, and it's going to touch a life somewhere in a way that you had absolutely no clue. And that's the same thing that your podcast is doing. You've got people listening that you have absolutely no clue where they're at or how they're being touched, but it's the fact that you're doing something and it reaches people. That's kind of, if I want to say that there's a reward, that's the reward. It all goes to God.
Absolutely.
But the fact that you can say, you know what, I did something that made a difference.
Mm-hmm.
That's really cool.
Yeah, and one of the segments that I see in the paper every month I really like is the 30-day Bible reading plan. And kind of what I've seen there that I really appreciate is you do almost a glossary for terms that can be found in that section of reading. If there's a city mentioned, you do a little blurb on that city. If there's a special person mentioned, you do a little blurb on who that is, or what's a Pharisee, what's a Sadducee, what's a zealot. You have definitions like these thrown in there. If the word Pentecost comes in, you can have a little glossary term there. So I really like that, and I think that could even spur some people on to actually try to read those passages that you list for the 30 days. So I'd just like to know, what are some of the other segments besides the 30-day reading plan that you try to have in every single issue?
Well, one of the things that we try and do on the front page is I want to have local content. And as I mentioned, we're in the Inland Empire, there are so many stories of what God is doing right here in our own area that can't be told in any other medium. We don't have Christian talk radio, local talk radio here. We do have daily newspapers, but they're not telling the stories about what God is doing in certain communities. Just as an example, in our last issue, we have one of our lead stories is about the Christian deaf community here in the Inland Empire. Sign language is it's either the second or the third highest, you would say, foreign language in the Inland Empire. Mm. There's a large amount of deaf in the IE, and so that's a story that we can tell that has a local tie. That's really important to us to be able to tell that. I do a kind of a publisher's note in every issue, which kind of turns into a story of what's on my heart, something that I see, and so you get a chance to kind of learn a little bit about me, and I try and bring a theological message to that as well. There are times that we'll do book reviews, maybe of recent Christian books from authors, that are on the charts. Mm-hmm. So we'll bring book reviews. We've also done interviews with some Christian artists. And the cool thing about this is we'll do the interviews audio, just, similar to, recording an interview. Mm. And just to give you an example, and you can find this on the website, and you can find it in one of the past issues. We did an interview with For King Country. I've done an interview with Plum. And so we'll record the interview, and we'll put the recording up in the podcast section on the website. And then we'll put excerpts of that inside the newspaper. Mm-hmm. And so, you could read those. Occasionally we'll do a community calendar of Christian events that are going on. We do have a free calendar on the website, so anyone can go on and put on a community calendar event and just let people know about it. And we'll take those events and we'll publish those in the paper as well. So, really the key things outside of the 30-day reading challenge, and I'm glad that you mentioned that, the key things is local content, mm-hmm. and then being able to kind of tap into some things that, like I said, like some artists, tap into a couple of things that are going on, maybe in the world nationally. We've done a couple of stories on some Christian movies that are coming out, mm-hmm. And so we've done kind of some press releases on some of those to let people know that hey, here's a Christian themed movie that's coming to the theaters here soon that you might want to look out for. Yeah. So that's kind of the type of editorial that we try and put in every issue.
Yeah, and talking about sharing the gospel too, I really like how your front page article shows local ministries and what they're doing. I remember you had one where it was pretty extensive on feeding the homeless. You had one which was an alternative to, I think, the Boy Scouts, something along that line. You had one with a church that was specifically targeting and reaching out to gamers, and by gamers, I think it was mostly the kind of like the real RPG gamers that are playing like on board games. And I think it's just interesting because if someone picks this up and like, oh, here's Christians serving the homeless here. Awesome. It's like giving something good and positive that we're doing in the community, and not even just the here's what the Bible teaches element, which is typically what people get if Christians are handing out something which is printed. It's usually you're a sinner, you're going to hell because of this. Good news, Jesus died for you. Now repent. Just kind of a different take. Like, oh, Christians doing something. And then as they start to look through it more, here's a 30-day Bible reading challenge. That's cool. Maybe I'll try to read some of these.
And those are great points. And the Bible reading challenge, and I just want to mention that really quick. And you're right, that's something that it's a pledge that we do in every single issue. And the way it's formatted, you can actually take out the 2 pages from the paper, put it up on your wall, and you can check the box off every day as you read it. You're going to read no more than 5 minutes a day, mm-hmm. and I'm going to take you through an entire book. Sometimes you might get through 5 books in a month, depending on where we're at. You know, if we're into the New Testament, you're going to get through quite a few books because the epistles there are rather short.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right. I did want to get definitions of terms because let's face it, if you don't know who the Pharisees are and you don't know who the Sadducees are, when you come across that, you're going to ask a question that's not going to make any sense. Depending on the version that you're reading, you know, like one of the definitions that sticks out to me is, and I don't remember exactly the context, but one of the definitions is of a Sabbath day journey. And when I read that, I'm like, well, how far is a Sabbath day journey, and why is it any different than any other journey?
Yeah.
So those are questions that come to my mind. If they come to my mind, I know that somebody else has asked the same thing. You know, there's a couple of different things when it comes to Christian newspapers. There's really 3 types. Nationwide, if you were to take the Christian newspapers, you could really put them into 3 different categories. One is evangelistic, and that would definitely be the category that I would put Life in His Hands under. It's certainly positive. It's evangelistic. It's meant to bring people to Christ. It's meant to get people reading their Bible. It's meant to bring somebody closer. You're going to find other newspapers that are going to be maybe more politically based, you know, mm-hmm. certainly on the right side of the political spectrum.
Yeah.
And then you're going to find some that are very heavy theologically based. And so that's certainly something too. If we're going to go back to one of your original questions in this segment, what are things that you would want to look into if you were to put together your publication? I knew that right away. I knew that I really wanted it to be evangelistic in nature. Mm-hmm. There are some, and I don't fault any of the other formats. There's some people that are very news heavy, like hard news. I was talking to a gentleman in the Northwest who runs a newspaper in, I want to say Portland, and he had spent 25 years in a traditional newspaper as a newspaper reporter. He does more hard news, mm-hmm. hard Christian news. We do great stories about what God's doing in the community, and there's room for all of those types of publications. Any Christian newspaper, any Christian publication is a great publication, whatever direction it comes from.
Yeah, that's great. I'm thinking this too. You've listed a lot that you're having to create each month. How many writers do you have to help you out? How did you find these writers? How many hours are you devoting each month to pull this off? I think those would be things people should consider, as you talked about in the last segment, of counting the cost of ministry.
Sure. The first couple of issues I had wrote entirely on my own, and so it took a little bit of time to put it together. The center section, which is the 30-day reading challenge, fortunately is a portion that, I'll just tell you a little secret, I can reuse year over year because I know that my readership is different from time to time, and we're still new. So somebody's finding the paper still for the first time. Uh-huh. So those definitions don't just run in one issue. They might run in 3 issues a year.
Good tip.
You know, because of the fact that, you know, it's a different readership. And let's face it, you know, how many times can you read the book of Hebrews enough during the year? No. You know, if you read it 3 times, if you read it 4 times, that's great. So everyone that has come aboard to write has come aboard in volunteering their time. Uh-huh. And I've never turned anyone down that has asked to write. It's been from, just to mention some people that have come aboard, I've got a lady who's very wonderful at narrative and storytelling, and she's written for newspapers in this area for about 25 years, and she does some stories for us at times. And this last issue, we had a gal from CBU's, California Baptist University here in Riverside. She writes for the school paper there, And this was her first published story outside of a school, and it was a front page story. It was it was the story on the deaf Christian community, and so to me, it's a great avenue to get people experience in writing because let's face it, we're all doing it for for the grace of God. We're not professionals want a lot of cash. There's people that are professionals who are giving of their time and their talent to make this work and to tell great stories. So that's one thing that we've been blessed with. And we've actually had some authors who have authored books who have also contributed some content as well.
Yeah, great. Good stuff. Kind of wrap up then. I want to talk about how you're using the paper to essentially advertise for events you are creating. So what type of events have you created for the local community that you're living in, for evangelism, for teaching, to take what you're learning with your MDiv studies and apply it? Because you're not a pastor, and that I know of, you're not at a school where when you're done, you are sent out automatically to a church, right? I know some seminaries work that way where you don't get to choose what church you go to when you're done. You're just automatically assigned a church within a denomination to do your first, what they would call a call. So you're using what you're learning, and you're like, hey, I'm learning a lot. I need to share this, as well as just your heart for evangelism. What type of events have you created, and have you noticed that the paper has helped you in bringing people to these community events?
So, you're right. There are some seminaries that you almost have built-in employment afterwards. Mine is not one of them. I attend Liberty University. It's out of Lynchburg, Virginia. Of course, I don't go there on campus because that would be a massive, unruly drive every morning from California to Virginia. I attend online and some of the great professors there, but you're right. You're kind of on your own finding your employment. So what the Lord has led me to is what I call outdoor street evangelism. And it's a little bit different from the guy holding a sign saying the end is near on a street corner. But what we've done is we've invited people down to one of the local parks, has an amphitheater, and it probably holds 50, 60 people. And we've invited people to the amphitheater and come down for actually almost a traditional church service during the week. And so it might be a Tuesday night, it might be a Friday night. We've got a kaya that comes down and leads worship, and, we do have prayer, and I get up, I've got a sermon prepared for every event. There's sometimes that we have food. People showed up last week, and their family hadn't eaten. They showed up with chicken. And so it was somebody else said, well, I'll bring chicken for everyone next time. So it's more of it's kind of a church outside the box, so to speak. And the neat thing about it is it's really portable because, we can go anywhere and go into any town and to any park. So that's something that we're certainly willing to do. And it's almost, instead of the crowd come to you, it's kind of go to the crowd type of thing. And I think what the connection with the newspaper has done is it's really kind of built some familiarity with myself, with my message. People kind of know what I'm about. They know, coming in, if they've met me through the paper, I know, okay, this guy's legit. His theology is solid. He's not a, this isn't a false teacher. This isn't a guy who's out for my money. He's not. I mean, in the church services we've had, I asked people, I'm like, okay, well, what can we do better? What are we missing? And there was a gal that told me last week, I preached last Friday. She said, well, you know what you're missing? And I said, what? She says, you're missing an offering plate. And I said, you know what? I didn't even think about it. And we've never asked for an offering. But it didn't even come to my mind. But, hey, that's the way that some people worship, is through their gift and their tithe. So it really has, I think the association with the newspaper has brought legitimacy to our street evangelism. and that's really cool. And just to let people know, if you're interested in listening to any of the sermons, you can find our podcast on iTunes.
Oh, okay.
And so as you're if you want to put it in your iPhone right next to this podcast, go to Life in His Hands. Just type in Life in His Hands on iTunes, and you'll find it there, and you can listen to the sermons there as well. So
right.
And we post those on the website whenever we're out. So it's a ministry that goes from print to actually in person, and it's amazing to see what God has done from a stage of unemployment and not knowing. If there's a testimony that I could tell anyone really over the last 3.5 years, is I would say do not underestimate the power of God.
Absolutely.
And here's the thing. Don't put yourself in a box, because in 4 years from now, you may be doing something. He may have led you somewhere that you didn't even imagine, that you didn't even think was possible. And he could put you in a position if you let him.
Yeah. Let's see. I'm thinking about my closing questions right now. I just got it. Talking about these events, like you said, don't underestimate the power of the Lord. You put on one of these events. It takes a good bit of time to prepare a message, to get your worship guy there. How do you get people to? You're going to the people, like you said, but at the same time, you kind of have to get people to show up to where you are. The one time you did this, no one showed, but you see one guy kind of come up to you because let's just worship. It's just me and the guy I'm here with that has the guitar. He comes up and says, what's going on? Can you just share a little bit about that exchange and what you learned from really not having anyone show up, particularly to be there to hear you speak? But this encounter.
So we had started what we thought was going to be a 6-week sermon series throughout the summer, and that was our human idea, and it wasn't God's idea. It was ours, and I think that's why it failed. But so we did our first one, and it was just really family and a couple of friends who we could get there, and we put the word out, letting people know that we were doing it again the next Thursday night, and no one showed up. No one showed up. I've set up a sound system, the table and all the tracks and stuff, and I had this overwhelming disappointment that came over me. And some of it was selfish, I know, but I'm like, we put all this effort into this and nobody showed up. And I was talking to Chris, he's our worship guy, and we're talking, we're saying, we kind of hung around for another 20 minutes or so, and said, what did we do wrong? And all of a sudden a kid walks through the gate where this amphitheater is. Got no shirt on. He's got sagging pants, and he's like, "Hey, what are you guys doing? I notice you're here. You're in my home park. I walk through this all the time, but I don't recognize what you're doing. What are you guys doing here?" Because there's microphones set up and there's speakers set up and guitar and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And for the next 20 minutes, we got to talk to him about Jesus. And it wasn't that, I wasn't preaching the message that I had prepared. Chris wasn't playing the songs that he had prepared. But God put one person there. And as I'm sitting here disappointed in a turnout, God puts the one person there that he wants there. And it really just, I walked away from that night humbled. And again, I was really taught a lesson. God teaches me so many lessons, and then I kind of curl up into a ball and say, sorry, I underestimated you.
Yeah. He seeks the one.
And the next week we have our largest crowd that we've ever had, and so far the cool thing is that this larger crowd has already said, yes, we will come back, and yes, we know other people that will bring, because here's the thing, and what I keep hearing, there's a lot of Bible studies during the week. in the evenings, but there's no like a legitimate church service. And this is what it is. This is what it is, but it's outside, so it's a little bit more kind of freedom. And we always do a Q&A at the end, and I don't want to take this on too long, but we do a Q&A. And the cool thing about this is you're going to ask the question of a pastor, and there's a lot of people that have questions. And at some churches that you go to, I don't get a lot of one-on-one time with my pastor.
Nope.
Just simply ask questions. Here, if you want to ask a question about the problem of evil, let's talk about it. You want to ask a question about, dinosaurs? Let's talk about it. So we have an atmosphere in a church setting where you can ask questions, theological questions, and let's talk about it. And so that's the cool thing about these events.
I love it. Thank you, Chris, so much for being on this episode of Reconnect. Listeners, that's Chris Thompson you were just listening to. You can go to lifeinhishands.org. You can find Life in His Hands on Facebook. If you have that, you can find Life in His Hands on Twitter. The podcast is also called Life in His Hands, and you can find that on iTunes as well as on the Life in His Hands blog from their website. And there's actually a podcast section. I was looking at the website, so I could tell you it's not on the top. If you want to just find the podcast itself, you slide to the bottom of the page. It's on the navigation. But if you click on the blog, you'll find all the podcast posts there, as well as other blog posts that Life in His Hands puts out. So, Chris, thank you so much for your time here. And listeners, if anything Chris has shared has resonated with you for something you can do, if it is or is not even related to publishing print, I just pray that you would move with it and see what God will open up, because as Chris was pointing out to you, God can do things you do not expect is possible, and He will have you doing things and being in places that you did not imagine. So just maybe step out and try the idea that God was putting on your heart right now as you were listening, and definitely He will bless you and bless others through it. And I'd love to hear your ideas from this podcast episode. Did anything stand out to you? Do you have any ideas of what you would like to do? And it could be months from now, and you actually do it. I'd love to just hear back from you on what you did. You can send those emails to andy@contradictmovement.org. And in a couple weeks, I will be releasing an episode where it will be like a Q&A based on emails that I've gotten and Facebook comments. So I think I already have that written out. So if you send it now, it won't be on the next this next Q&A, but maybe in a future one. All right, God bless you, listeners. And please, if you found this to be a blessing, share it with someone that you think is a writer. Share it with someone that you think has the skill set or the gumption to actually get out there and hand out a paper. All right, thank you, listeners, and God bless you all. It's through Jesus Christ alone that we are reconnected into a right relationship with the Lord.
Your mission, if you choose to accept it. Share this episode on all of your social media sites and with your email contacts, people who will benefit from listening to the show. Thank you for listening. Reconnect us, O Lord.